Roll call. All members of council are present with the exception of Josh Poling, who is excused, and Megan Greisen, who's messaged me. She's on her way. Oh, Josh is online. All right. Well, he's excused to be online.
I'm here.
All right. Approval of tonight's agenda. Have a motion.
So moved.
Hearing a motion, is there a second?
Second.
Motion and second, any discussion? Being none, all those in favor state by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Motion carries. Public comments. Is anyone here tonight wanting to comment on anything not on tonight's agenda on urban renewal? Seeing none, I'll close public comments. Election of chair and vice chair of the Urban Renewal Agency. Do you have any motions? Currently, I'm the chair, and I believe, Josh, you're the vice chair?
Mayor,
That is
Well,
correct.
I move that we keep the existing structure for the urban renewal.
Hearing a motion, do I have a second?
Second.
Hearing a second, any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor state by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Motion carries. New business, urban renewal district analysis. Pinnock? Did I get that right?
Yeah, Papanuk, yes. All right. Do I have the ability to share my screen here? Let's see.
What we have it here for.
You wanna? Yep,
Oh,
there you go.
perfect.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Mayor and Council, for having me here. Nick Papanuk with Tiberius Solutions. I've been doing work for urban renewal agencies across the state for 15 years or so, and doing work for your urban renewal agency for a number of years as well. Tonight, this presentation goes over the fact that the Urban Renewal District should have more funding than what was originally projected in the plan. We'll describe why that is the case. We'll describe how much extra funding we're talking about and options for how you might want to respond to that increase in revenue. So in terms of the increased revenue, the first thing is that this Urban Renewal District was established in December of 2019. And this current fiscal year is the first time it had a chance to collect any tax increment finance or TIF revenues. The amount of taxes imposed for the district wound up being significantly higher than was expected in this first year. In order to figure out what was going on, we took a look at the total assessed value in the area, the frozen base, the increment value, tax rate, and taxes imposed. We saw that the frozen base value and the tax rate were both within 99% of what was originally projected, but that the total value in the area was about 7% higher. And that increase, keeping the frozen base the same, but increasing the total value, led to a substantial increase in the increment value, 275% higher. And then that carried over into the taxes that were imposed. So that's something that we see a lot in the early years of an urban renewal area. Small changes, or relatively small changes, in the total assessed value can make a big difference in the increment value in the area in the early years, because the increment starts off so small that an extra couple of $1 million of assessed value can have a major difference in terms of how much tax revenue you're forecasting. So we investigated to see what was behind that increase in total assessed value in the area. That's the second table on this slide here. And we could see that, yes, there was an increase in value for real property and for utility property above and beyond what was forecast. But that personal property, that's machinery and equipment value in the area, was primarily responsible for the increased value above and beyond what was forecast. So what caused that increase in value? A couple of things. The largest consideration was that one particular piece of machinery and equipment for Cascade Holdings in the area, with roughly $2 million of assessed value, was not included in the original data set from back in 2018, 2019 when this work was done. So this was a new piece of machinery and equipment that was brought on site after that frozen base analysis had occurred. And so that's why it showed up today and increased the amount of taxes that the area is generating, but wasn't anticipated originally. In addition to that, we did identify that there was an error in the original workbook that the consultant team had put together on this, where a handful of properties that had multiple pieces of machinery and equipment on them were not capturing all the value of those multiple pieces of machinery. That was about $1 million of the total difference that we saw here. And then on utility properties, those are always difficult to forecast, in large part because they do not have a specific geographic location. The state treats utility property in a very unique way, and they determine the total value of a utility and then apportion it out to each taxing district across the state. And so when you're creating a new urban renewal district, it has a new custom tax code boundary, and no value has yet been apportioned to it. And so you always have to estimate. And the estimate here wound up being low, and there wound up being an increase in that value above and beyond what was expected. It does tend to be volatile going forward. So that was what we think was behind and explains the increase in value that we have seen so far in the first year of the district. What does that mean going forward, and what should you all do in response to that? The future growth in assessed value for utility and personal property does tend to be unpredictable. People can add new pieces of machinery and equipment every single year, and those machines could depreciate in value or be removed from site any year. Likewise, with utility value, there's only 4 utility customers in the area that account for 90% of the utility value here. And so if the state decides that there is some change to the valuation of Comcast as an entity, that trickles down to all the other jurisdictions across the state and can have a big upswing or downswing in every given year. That means that although we did see this increase in value this first year, there is no guarantee that it's going to continue to carry over in all future years. That's probably the most conservative bet, is to think that this value probably just continues as this the small amount of increase gets added in every single year. It's not necessarily a trend line to suggest that the values in this area are going to keep growing exponentially faster. We do recommend that in areas where there does seem to be a significant amount of utility and personal property value, that it makes sense to keep an eye on that and just track it every year. So next month will be when the next tax roll data is released, and it makes sense to take a look at that and see how much utility value and personal property value is in the area, and whether this increase was sustained from one year to the next, whether it increased even further, suggesting that this is maybe a trend that's going to continue for a little while longer, or whether things started to correct a little bit and we have less of a difference moving forward. So that was the first piece on the discrepancies in value that we observed in the first year of the district. I can pause there for questions before we move on to the next item on why we anticipate tax revenue to be higher in the future, which relates to enterprise zones.
Any questions? Go ahead.
All right. So on enterprise zones, this is a more substantial difference in value that we're anticipating that's going to start happening in a few years and will add up. The urban renewal area includes 3 different tax accounts that are receiving enterprise zone tax abatement benefits. All of these properties are owned by Cascade Tissue Group. These properties have several schedules of tax abatements that are going to end between 2024 and 2026. The table up here with an overwhelming number of numbers shows each of those accounts, shows the fact that they currently add up to $59.7 million worth of value, but that only $10.3 million of that value is currently on the tax roll, and that there's $49 million worth of value that is currently abated due to the enterprise zone program. The bulk of that $47 million worth is slotted to come back to the tax roll in 2024, with smaller dollar amounts coming on the tax rolls in 25 and 26. So these are very large amounts of value that are currently abated, that will be coming back on the tax rolls and weren't captured in the original projections for the urban renewal plan. That is going to increase your cash flow above and beyond the original projections. Now, one thing I do want to point out here is that these properties currently have $49.3 million of abated value. But they could go up with appreciation in the coming years, or it could go down with depreciation in the coming years. We don't know enough about these three specific tax accounts and what their future valuation might do to say with certainty that it's going to be exactly 49.3 million coming back on the tax rolls. This is another thing that I think is worth keeping an eye on an annual basis, to look at these three specific tax accounts and whether they appear to be trending upward or downward in value. This chart here shows the solid blue line was the original forecast and the dashed line is the updated forecast. So you can see in these very first couple of years, the dashed line is slightly above the assessed value that we had originally projected. But once these enterprise zone abatements expire, you can see how that really dramatically changes the trajectory of this urban renewal area. You know, on top of the increases in assessed value that we discussed, one other change that's factored in here is that we did slightly cool off the assumed growth in new construction in the area in the coming years. So when this forecast was originally put together back in 2019, we assumed that by now there would start to be some substantial new development taking place in the area. It's almost like we didn't anticipate a major pandemic coming through and ravaging the global economy. So with the original projections, we were anticipating a 7% annual growth in assessed value each year moving forward. The updated version of that drops things down to a more reasonable 4% growth in assessed value in the next fiscal year, and then slowly ramps that up over time to where we get to a 7% annualized growth for the long term once the area really gets its footing and new development begins to really kick in. So this chart here is showing the projected tax revenue. That last one was the projected assessed value, but this is the tax revenue for the area. You can see the frozen base, the blue bar along the bottom. That's the taxes that go to the affected taxing districts and stays constant over the life of the urban renewal plan. And the gray area is the amount going to the urban renewal agency. And again, you can see how that goes from very, very little in the current year to a substantial amount, roughly $1 million per year once the enterprise zone properties come back on the tax roll, and then continues to grow from that point forward. One thing that this chart shows, that the original urban renewal plan anticipated that you'd be able to pay off your maximum indebtedness by the year 2050. And this plan shows that you'd be able to pay it off 4 years earlier in 2046. And in fact, in 2046, that a good portion of those revenues would not actually be needed to pay off the debt. That is that little light blue triangle of shared revenue, the money in the last year that would not be needed to pay the debt and would also go back to the other taxing districts. So what are some of the key takeaways from this? The urban renewal district is anticipated to generate significantly more TIF revenue in future years than originally forecast. That means that the URD can fund projects sooner than originally anticipated. When you're funding those projects sooner than anticipated, that means that you're able to avoid some of the inflation costs that would occur long term. And so with that, even if you have the same maximum indebtedness for your plan, but you're spending the money sooner, that means you have a higher purchasing power. And so we show that if you kept the maximum indebtedness but had this more aggressive timeline with higher annual revenues, you'd actually gain about $4 million of purchasing power in today's dollars. There are some options for how the city and the urban renewal agency might want to address this. One option would be to maintain your current maximum indebtedness and to just recognize that you're going to have the ability to do this work sooner and close down the district sooner, and you'll avoid some inflation and be able to have that $4 million increase in purchasing power. I'd say that's option one. Another option would be to say, let's stick with the original timeline. We plan to have urban renewal through the year 2050. Let's continue to have it go through 2050. But now we're having more annual revenue per year, which means we can fund more projects. And in that case, we want to go ahead and amend the urban renewal plan to increase the maximum indebtedness and take advantage of that. And that would allow you to spend even more money than what we're discussing here, though I haven't calculated exactly what that would mean in terms of your increased capacity. And then the third option would be to say, let's stick with the 2050 timeline, and let's also stick with our current maximum indebtedness. And that means that there is extra cash flow being generated. We're going to generate more cash than we need to achieve that maximum indebtedness in the desired timeline. And what we would do with the additional revenue then would be to share it with the other taxing districts. So what does voluntary revenue sharing look like? This is where the city could calculate the annual TIF revenue that they receive using only a portion of the total increment. And we refer to this as revenue sharing or an under levy. And so this would wind up, if you keep the maximum indebtedness the same, the long-term impacts to those taxing districts would be the same regardless. If your maximum indebtedness is, X million dollars, that's really the amount of money that these taxing districts will be foregoing. It's a question of whether you want to start sharing some of the benefits with them early, recognizing that it would go until the year 2050 before the district completely closes down, or would these districts not receive any of the increment at all for the entire life of the area, but recognize that it could close down in 2046, and they would start getting the full amount, the big increase in revenue back 4 years sooner than would otherwise happen. And so the under levy approach would result in less foregone revenue for taxing districts on an annual basis, but extended for a longer duration. Those are, I think, in a nutshell, the three sort of options that you have to address the increased revenues that we're projecting. I would say that there's no requirement for any decision or policy direction to be taken tonight, but you certainly could choose to direct staff to go in one direction. One word of caution is that the fact that we are projecting in year one that it looks like there's going to be more revenue long term doesn't mean that that's going to happen. We're looking at a 20 or 30 year duration here. There's going to be ups and downs in market cycles. What we're forecasting as a surplus today could turn into a deficit if we have another terrible, market condition, or likewise, if things really turn around for the better, the surplus could wind up being substantially more than what we have forecast in today's presentation. So long-term financial forecasts are definitely uncertain, but right now we are forecasting surplus revenues, and there are a few approaches you might want to keep in mind for the future in terms of how you address those surplus revenues. And with that, I will turn things back to you, Rob.
Any questions?
Thank you, Nick, for the presentation and update. Alex, I'd be interested in knowing if we have a good understanding of the current amount of E-zone parcels that are within the URD and how that would potentially impact as there's future development within those parcels. Do I need to be more direct in my question?
Yeah, I'm not sure. So with the particular parcels that are receiving E-zone benefits, you're talking about them further developing so they extend their E-zone benefit? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, so underdeveloped E-zone
Sure.
locations.
I mean, that is possible, especially like, for instance, I know Cascade Tissue's been talking about expanding. That could extend their E-zone benefit. That's always possible. I believe last I heard they were increasing the number. I don't think they were adding a building, which has been talked about in the past, but I do believe they were adding some equipment, which I think technically could have potentially qualified them for additional benefits. I have to go back and double check. I have not heard about any other current E-zone benefit recipients extending, but it's possible.
So my understanding when we formed the urban renewal district was that it was built based on the understanding that some of these properties were E-zone properties, and that once they go off of the E zone for property they currently have, don't get extended benefits on that property, I don't think. They get extended benefits on whatever the new equipment is, or
Right, so
new
it's
building.
not the exact same thing over and over again, but arguably they could get new benefits in the future depending on what they do. and
not
how
on
they
the
develop.
building they currently built.
Right, no, and I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about the value of what they already got the benefit from. Whatever the value of the new thing is, that's what you're talking about.
Maybe as a follow-up, I know from the Cascade Tissue site, just north of that, there is another parcel that currently identifies itself as for sale within the enterprise zone categorization.
Sure.
And so if that is currently underdeveloped and a new landowner comes in and develops that and utilizes the E zone, invest hopefully millions of dollars into that parcel, how will that impact the potential revenues from the URD moving forward? Because now their property potentially will have an exemption for certain tax revenues that we would not potentially have received because it's within the URD.
Right.
Oh.
Yes, so that's entirely possible because you do have that E zone out there. So arguably, if the business qualifies, then yes, you could be looking at more situations where people are then investing a lot of money, but then we're not seeing that tax revenue for 5 to 7 years because they can do 2 years in construction and then they can do up to 5 in the words.
So I think thank you for that clarification, because I just want to put to the agency that we should understand that there's a lot of fluctuation potentially that it can occur as those properties develop. So even though today may be a lot of great news and that there's more revenue than expected, to know that this isn't necessarily a trend, it's just a snapshot of the current market. And so I just ask for us not to get overly excited with the news of additional revenues and that we are fiscally responsible with the use of these funds as we move forward.
I agree. I mean, and for me, I would rather see the district end a few years earlier because these projections continue than to be parsing out money thinking, oops, can't do that, or we're short. I think that the other districts would be thrilled once we're no longer here.
Well, right. And the other thing I'd point out too is that, there had been some discussion of help, particularly with the fire district, helping them out. But if we use the art funds to do that instead, you're using a different source to work with them, to show good faith, to support them. And then also sticking with the plan essentially of trying to maybe potentially end the district sooner rather than continue it longer. So I think you really could accomplish both if that's what you so choose.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Sure, Haugen. Yeah.
Nick, Joel Haugen. So yeah, a good presentation. Thank you. And I think who else we have on the line there? Your whole Tiberius crew is a good group. So in terms of we don't have a clue really what the economic situation is going to be a year from now. It could be flourishing or it could be in the toilet. So what would be from your perspective at this juncture, what will be the safest route for the city to take?
Yeah, I think I'm in agreement with all of you that the safest route is to keep an eye on these numbers and to not make any policy decisions now that commit you to revenue sharing or commit you to a tighter timeline or anything like that, but to say this is good news. Let's hope that it continues. And if it continues for a long time, maybe a decade from now, you do decide to start making some different policy solutions because you've had sustained growth and you can see that you have the ability then to maybe commit more strongly to a different policy. But even at that point in time, you may still think the most prudent action is to just keep going forward without any official changes, knowing that you can close this thing down sooner than everybody originally anticipated. And that in and of itself is a win for all the overlapping taxing districts and the community.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Poling?
I just wanted to concur with I think Brandon and I think everybody else is on the same page too. That I think that we really need to maintain the course and if and ideally, I would say it would be great if we can end this urban renewal after we paid for everything early, so that our local taxing districts can get some of those funds back as well. Would be ideal, but we have no idea what's going to happen in the next 5 years, 10 years, even 20 years. I would rather us just maintain the course, hope that all that comes along and that we can, end this early. But that's just my thought.
Anything else? Thank you very much. All right, next item. Discussion for storefront business improvement program. Elaine,
Hi,
welcome.
thank you. I agree with what Nick said in the last presentation, so I think you're on good course there. Nick and I have talked that through, and since there are so many unknowns, it just makes a lot of sense to do it that way. So I am trying to upload my PowerPoint here. It says it's uploading. Is this full screen for you?
We can see it okay.
Yes.
You can see it.
Okay, thank you. I have worked on this with Scott Vandenmas in my office, but since Nick was already at the meeting too, we decided not to have too many consultants at your meeting at one time. So I'm going through the presentation, and Scott will help me as we move forward to do whatever you decide for us to move forward with. So one of the first things that we wanted to just put in your mind as we go through the rest of the presentation are what are the goals of the agencies in moving ahead with some kind of a storefront improvement or business improvement area. And the questions to think about as we're moving through this presentation are you wanting to provide funds for the overall area storefront improvements, improvements just based on priority sites, or improvements which will also assist new businesses. And some of those decisions might be different as you give us direction. One of the things that we've learned in working with we've worked with over 100 different urban renewal agencies and areas in the state is that on storefront programs, the application and process is really important in the success of your program. The less stringent, you'll probably get more applicants. If you make it really stringent and difficult to apply and difficult to meet the standards, you'll get less applicants. And that recruitment of businesses to participate is really important, because without recruitment, the programs don't flourish. When Scott and I started categorizing different types of programs across the state that we've worked with, we see 4 different types that happen, and I'll go through each one of those. So untargeted loans, targeted loans, no recruitment, targeted loans with recruitment, targeted loans for both storefront and businesses, and with recruitment. So what does that mean? This just shows a matrix of what that actually means and what the process might be, and then I'll go through each different category specifically. So untargeted loans, all 4 of those different kinds of things, you have to develop a program, and that is what we will work with you to do. And you have to market the program, so there's an X in all of those. URA-wide applications, if you do untargeted loans, you would take them urban renewal area-wide. Business improvement and storefront, you would do area-wide. But if you're just looking at a specific area, a specific street, just a specific part of your commercial district, then you're limiting your applications. And then the next category is, do you limit your applications? The next one is, do you meet with property owners to recruit them? And there are programs in the state that we'll talk about that actively do that. And that's what the targeted area loan recruited means. And also then, do you provide assistance to both property owners and business owners? So that's a little differentiation. You aren't just providing assistance to the owner of the property, but maybe the person who leases the business in a property. And then your success is usually based on the business initiative, or is your success based on the amount of work from the city? So in a recruitment loan, your staff level of impact is higher. So you can see that both of the recruitments that we look at, the two categories at the end, where you're actually going out and working with property owners and getting them to do your programs, take the most level of staff input. So on an untargeted loan, if that is going to be a successful program where you just say this is available anywhere within our urban renewal area, the application needs to be understandable and easy to work with. You need to have a simple process for approval so that people understand what that process is and don't get scared away. What we have found is if you do an untargeted loan and don't spend a lot of time working with people, you probably will not have a successful program. An example of that is Winston, who came to us a number of years ago and said, we have this great program. It's a loan program. We've set it up and we can't get anybody to take advantage of it. And the problem was there was nobody in their commercial core who had the money to do a match that they were requiring in their loan program. So their targets were too high. They needed to be able to give grants instead of loans to make that program work. Targeted loans are just where you say we have this key corner and we want to do this corner first because we think it's really important in our business district and we think it will provide stabilization or provide new activity that will spur other people to do projects. Or maybe your targeted area is just the main street, just the main corridor of your commercial area. So in both Tillamook and Coos Bay, they have targeted areas. They don't necessarily do the recruitment. They make sure people understand the program, but the applicants actually come to them. They don't go out and recruit businesses to participate. Recruitment is the most successful. If any of you have gone through the city of Sandy, you over the past few years should have noticed a big difference in their area. And at the end of this PowerPoint, we have a whole section just on their program. But they started out their program by targeting specific sites and recruiting those business owners to improve their buildings. The staff is the staff legwork is really what makes that a successful program. That program may include preparation of design guidelines. So if you, like Sandy, definitely has design guidelines that we'll go through. It doesn't have to involve design guidelines, but it could. And the recruitment usually includes one or more of the following: an individual contact with the property owners, offer for some kind of specific assistance, working with them on potential design concepts, because a lot of property owners don't have the architectural background or the ability to visualize what could be done to their facade of their building without somebody giving them ideas or showing them drawings. And example programs, Coos Bay has done that for some of their properties. They also have just their general programs. Sandy does that in a very specified way, and the city of Albany has done that also very successfully. These next couple of slides just go through a couple of programs that we've worked with that tells you the kinds of matches and the kinds of dollar amounts that different cities have placed. So all programs begin in Coos Bay with a pre-application meeting with staff. For the facade improvement grant, it's a 50% match. It has a minimum match of $1,000 and a maximum match of $25,000. The improvements are limited to exterior visible walls. They also have a landscape improvement grant, a same, again, 50% match. Minimum match is $500, maximum match $10,000. It includes streetlights, replacement or repair of landscape features, all obviously no maintenance. It has to be sticks and bricks. It can't be anything that can be moved away. So not buying them plants that go in planters that will die that year. It's major landscape features. They also have what they've termed their colossal improvement grant, and that is a minimum match of $10,000, and the maximum match is determined by their city council and the Urban Renewal Agency. It has the same kind of scope as the facade improvement grant program. It's just larger, and later I can show you some pictures of some great projects that they've been able to do with those different grants. In Astoria, they have an exterior rehab renovation program in their urban renewal area. For the storefront, it's up to $1,000 of a total grant or 10% of a project budget, whichever is less. It can be up to $10,000 grant assistance per property with a 50% match required by the applicant for improvements. The grant amounts above $10,000 require a higher level of match, so it goes up to a 75% match. And requests exceeding $50,000 are approved by the agency as loans, but they're administered through Craft 3, another agency specifically for doing that kind of administration. And the specific terms are negotiated prior to the Urban Renewal Agency Board consideration. Oregon City has a successful program also. They provide a match of $50,000 for a combined minimum of $100,000 project. So they're going for bigger projects with a maximum grant for any one project of $150,000. Their emphasis is on projects that incorporate mixed use concepts and that improve the economic vitality of the urban renewal area. And applicants who have received funding in the last 12 months are not eligible to apply the following year. And their annual budget is $200,000. So they may just do one of those a year or two of them, but not a lot of smaller types of grants. This just shows those three programs that we've looked at and what qualifies and what the match amounts are. So design assistance, the only one that specifically calls that out is Astoria. However, we know that Sandy, we'll cover Sandy in full in a minute, but they totally cover design assistance. So next I have a bunch of pictures, but before I go into those, would you like to ask any questions on the material that's been presented?
Yeah, right. Hi, Elaine. This is Megan Grayson. I just had a clarifying question. Are you looking for us this evening to decide on what kind of loans or recruitment or no recruitment moving forward, or is this just informational? I just want to make sure that my head's in the right place as you're walking through it.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I should have covered that up front. And unfortunately, my last slide says that, which would have been more helpful if it was up front. No, I'm saying I should have rearranged that. We will go through this. If you don't have the ability to give input tonight, that is totally fine. It would be great if you could give input on a couple of things that would allow us to proceed and come back to you. And I will go to the end here and show you
I would just jump in and add, I don't think there's so much the expectation that you would pick a program this evening, but it is more to start the conversation. You all have, and I'm rounding slightly, budgeted about 25,000 per year essentially for these programs. So just to keep in mind, that's the dollar amount in there currently. And there's been some talk about wanting to start moving this forward now that we do have some funds. So what we wanted to just understand was more what kind of program you all were looking for, because when you actually look at the urban renewal plan, this is identified as a goal, but it was not fleshed out how it would end up working. So
Right.
it really, what we're just looking for is just a little direction, and then we can come back and you can make final decisions later, but we just wanted to start the conversation.
Right. And this
Uh,
is the, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Elaine. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. This is the type of input, and like Alex said, this doesn't have to happen tonight, but it needs to happen before I can move forward and bring you back a program to review. So what kind of program do you want to do? Do you want it focused on a specific area in your city or a specific building type? Do you want to do grants or loans or a combination of those? Do you have leverage requirements that you want to do? Are you interested in design guidelines like the city of Sandy did? And what kind of staff time commitment are you expecting from the program? Because we want to make sure to design a program that can actually be implemented by your staff. So that, again, doesn't have to be decided tonight, but those are the kinds of input that we need to move forward to the next phase.
So, to me, the targeted plan, but very specifically, I mean, we have properties within the zone that are currently undeveloped. And I would like to be able to persuade the people that develop those properties to include something that looks nice in that spot. I'm very specific, the spot across the street from the city of Scapa City Hall. It's just a gravel lot. I'd really hate to just see apartments go in when there should be some sort of commercial facade of some sort at that very corner. What happens in the back, I'm not worried about. That front facade as you enter our downtown over here, to me, is really important. I think Mr. Lasowski had raised.
I just say that I agree. Now, does this tie into our downtown overlay at all? I mean, that's one of the areas that's on there, but this, my way of thinking, this should be the downtown overlay right here. But this is included in I saw it's on the map, so this is an area we can include for improvements.
Yeah, it's in the map and the downtown overlay applies. They both apply.
Yeah,
But me, very specifically to that very spot as you enter.
I agree. I think that's the way we should approach all of this because we only have so many lots that we can actually have some control over to see what our cities look like in the future. You know, I think that's really critical. Both areas that we identify what we want to go there or what we don't want to go there. Maybe that's even more important.
Dragon. Oh, or Brandon.
Elaine, I would just be curious to know, what is the FTE equivalent for the Sandy program?
I don't know that, but I can easily get that and get it back to you.
And then Alex, I would be curious to know your thoughts on who or what department would be executing the loan program and the application processes. How do we budget for that? Or can URD dollars offset the labor for executing the program?
So as the district goes on in the future, there will be more and more dollars set aside for admin that will be able to help with those costs. But right now, it's pretty low. So it cannot cover any one person. So right now, in the past, it probably would have been me. So at this point, my thought is that when we go to make some hires here in the very near future, that urban renewal specifically, I want to include that in, finance admin and also the assistants.
The
Goals.
shared
Right.
time delegation.
So and there's some things like that where I really want to have a little bit of redundancy built in. as far as who's doing it and who's familiar with the programs. In the meantime, my suggestion would be, something on the simpler side that would be easier to just take less staff time. And then, perhaps myself and Huel and Isaac could probably cover it. But as it over time, maybe as there's more money or you change the program, we could certainly look at having someone more dedicated to it. But I definitely do want to be cautious about that piece.
I appreciate your forecasting and thinking about how we will move forward with that. Thank you.
Elaine, Joel Haugen, kind of a follow-up to Brandon's question. So I think you mentioned you have 100 some communities you've worked with in this program. Have you done any analysis for the cost of staff time associated with the targeted loans and recruitment? Is that into the equation anywhere?
That's a great question, and I have never participated in that part. I help design programs or help provide input on why a program isn't working and reimagine it. But I leave the staff time to the staff people. But I have really good contacts, obviously, across the state, and that's something that we can help provide information on for you by contacting people and doing some research.
Yeah, I think that'll be helpful, kind of a return on investment to the process. That'd be nice to quantify. Thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Chairman.
Josh?
My comment would be, I think that we need to figure out where our focus, will be first on this area. So are we looking at trying to set guidelines, or are we trying to improve what we currently have? Like, and that specific is, is that like the business overlay, or the current businesses along the highway, are we trying to develop those storefronts, or are we trying to set guidelines for what future development is?
Did you get that, Elaine?
I did. That's a great question, and that decision is really your decision. You can do both. Your plan authorizes both activities. So you could set up a small program just to help improve individual storefronts, or you could pick a site like the one across from City Hall and say, we're going to spend our energy working with the owner of that site and try to get an awesome development for our city on that site. And you can do both. And you have, a little extra money now that you didn't think you were going to have. So you have the ability to do a little bit of both right now.
Elaine, this is Megan again. The two scenarios that you gave, if we paired those together, would that fall under the targeted loans with recruitment?
Yep.
Great, thank you.
Filosofsky.
Elaine, I would just like to provide my input. So the type of program that I would like for us to do is towards targeted loans, most likely with recruitment, but focusing on a specific geographical area within the URD. I would prefer that it's a matching grant program. I would think that we incorporate a listing of different facade criterias that would be allowed within the program, such as if somebody wanted to do a business signage, especially along, say, the highway. So being creative and looking at best practices on how the application criterias are in similar developing locales. And I would like to keep this, the time commitment as minimal as possible, but also understanding that there's potential for growth as the funds and the program expands over time. Thank you.
Thank you. Those are great comments. That's why I looked at Coos Bay and Astoria. So they're both a little bigger than you, but not so much bigger that their programs don't have some tie to what you're trying to do.
Elaine, we've got about 10 minutes.
Right. Does anybody else want to add anything in, or would you like me, if you would like me to go over some of the programs, I would be happy to do that. Just some of the pictures of different projects, because it gives you an idea. Or if you have more questions to ask, I'd be happy to just answer those. So give me direction on what you want me to do.
Looks like everyone's questions are answered if you want to show.
One question. Now, are we talking about like identifying a theme for our community? Is that kind of what we're talking about here?
That can happen. That doesn't have to happen. Sandy is really the only city where they have done that, and they've done it very successfully. But none of the other cities have identified those themes, and you already have your downtown overlay. And I haven't specifically looked at that and need to see what requirements are in that. So that's something that you may do. It costs more because you have to hire an architect to come in and develop that for you. But let me tell you, I think the City of Sandy's program is the best I've seen anywhere. But it also is most costs the most to get started.
One thing I would point out here with that specific piece is the 50-year plan that we're talking about, that RFP that's going to go out, a lot of that was going to focus on any necessary code updates and look at the downtown overlay. So there could be some dovetailing, between that project and this project. So, perhaps maybe Elaine and I can meet obviously offline after this as we're preparing to bring some information back to you, and then actually talk to Lori and see maybe how those two could fit together. Because I do think there would be meaningful overlap there.
Okay. I'd like to show you just a couple. I know I'm not going to get through all of these, so I'm going to pick a couple of them just to show you what other cities have done. So this is in La Grande, and they also do just a typical storefront program, but they also work with, and it's mostly young entrepreneurs who are wanting to start out businesses, and they help them rehabilitate buildings or go into industrial buildings to create new businesses and so it's new services to the community, new business opportunities, new employment. And they are using their urban renewal dollars to help pay for parts of the renovation of the buildings to allow those new businesses to be created. So to me, that's a really great example of how you can use the urban renewal funds. This is the Fort George Brewery in Astoria. It used to be a body shop. You can see on the top picture, it had broken out windows. It was in really horrible condition. The owners, the Fort George Brewery owners, bought it, and they cobbled together a lot of different financing sources, including SBA loans and state of Oregon loans, but they did get also money from Urban Renewal to help make the whole package work. And most of us know Fort George Brewery is very successful. They are now shipping, to everywhere on the West Coast and to the Rocky Mountains. They have started other businesses on adjacent blocks there, so it has grown that whole area of town. Move back. This is just one of the facades that was done in Sandy. Their whole program is built on the mountain theme. So you can see here the fast food restaurant still had to put up the different theme. The Goodwill had to do the same kind of thing, just to make sure that all buildings, new buildings, and anybody who receives any renovation money do it in a style that fits what they want Sandy to look like, which is a mountain community. So it started out looking at the Timberline Lodge and some of the architectural features of that, had an architect come in and do drawings. They actually went to specific businesses located in key places in the community to start their program and said, we will do this. We'll put a lien on your property so that you have to maintain it. But to get it started, they went to specific businesses and said, we want to do this to your building, and showed them architectural renderings of what their building could look like. It is an incredibly successful program in the community. So this is just a renovation in Coos Bay of the historic City Hall that is now into 12 separate office spaces and housing up above. This is another building in Coos Bay. Also an historic building. It also has apartments up above, commercial spaces on the bottom. This is also in Coos Bay. And unfortunately, this building's in the way, the picture that they sent me, but this is the tallest building on the Oregon coast. And this is what the renovation is looking like. So it's really very nice. This is one done in Albany. Again in Albany. This is also in Coos Bay. And this is also in Coos Bay in a little different district, but it's just taking an old rundown where the subway was and then improved the building so it just looks like a nice building within their community. So those are just some pictures which I always think are helpful because it lets you see what can really be done and that it has been done. And I think maybe what we'll do is send through a survey to all of you to get your input on the kind of program. It'll be really simple, and see what more information you need before we start designing one. Does that sound good, Alex?
Sounds good.
That's a great idea.
Sounds good.
Yes, and I'll follow up with you tomorrow.
And we got to start a city council meeting in a couple minutes.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, Elaine.
Yep, thank you.
Meeting adjourned. You got a couple of minutes if you need to wash your hands. You go wash my hands.